Here we are already on the 8th day of Christmas. Yes, Christmas is actually a season in the church year. It lasts 2 whole weeks. It's also the first Sunday after Christmas, and it's also the Sunday we could be celebrating Epiphany because it falls on a weekday this year. And any of those topics would be wonderful to speak on, but today I've decided to remind you of some of the Christmas carols that we sing and a little bit of history behind the Christmas carols. And the two that I'd really like to talk about is Do You Hear What I Hear? And the Carol of the Bells, which I think is really important this year. Note that the Carol of the Bells was written in 1899. The melody was. There was a person who was supposed to follow in his father's Orthodox priestly footsteps, but instead of doing that, he decided to become a music teacher. And as a music teacher, he would share wonderful music from all traditions and folk songs, and he would try to get people really immersed in those songs and energized in those songs. And one of the songs was Shchedryk. And Shchedryk was a song about a bird, and it was moving into the springtime, and it was really a song about Ukraine. It was a story about will they ever have independence, and it was going all the way back to Nicholas the Tsar and the troubles that they had with that country at that time. And the melody was such a dun da da dum bum ba da dum bum ba da dum, 4 notes always being repeated. And as time went on, he became a favorite of many other composers. And one of the composers, who would have thought? One of the composers was invited to do a spot at Carnegie Hall. And it didn't happen until the 20s and 30s. And as they were getting ready to perform, he found out that he needed another little jingle to put in a little spot that they didn't have music for. And all he could remember was because the night before he listened again to Shchedryk, and it was that melody, dun 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 dun. And he decided right then and there he put Christmas words to the melody. And it was after that that it became such a big hit all around Carnegie Hall, and everybody was asking for the notes to the song so that they could sing the song about the bells. But the song about the bells was originated as Shchedryk, and it was about the history of Ukraine, and it was the history of Russia always trying to overtake other nations. The song has become popular in the United States. It is sung all over the place, and more often than not, it is the little jingle that is behind some of the commercials that we hear on a regular basis during this season of Christmas. Dum, da, da, dum, dum, da, da, dum. And we love the song, and we need to know that, yes, that song spoke all those years ago to the Ukrainian people, and the Ukrainian people right now are suffering every bit as much as they did back in 1899 when that song melody first got performed. And the other song I want to share a little bit with you about is Do You Hear What I Hear? It's a song that's been popular within our American Christmas tradition songs for a long time. And I think if you go on to the list of 10 favorite songs, Christmas songs of the season, you will find that it is one of the songs that is listed. And there is a history to that song. Do you hear what I hear? It goes back to 1962. And thank you to one of our Christmas Day dinner guests who brought this to my attention. Thank you, Terry. I did not realize the history of the song until he brought it to my attention. It is a song that got composed. Are you ready for this? What was going on in our country at that time? Do you recall? What was it that was going on in the 60s? And how much do you remember about it? In the 60s, besides the movement with Martin Luther King and all of the importance of every life mattering, well, let me tell you, I, like some other people, have thought it was based on a folk song from the past, but you know what? Do You Hear What I Hear has meaning. It was something completely different and surprising about its source. It isn't a folk song at all, but was written in 1962 at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm not going to go into the whole detail of it, but the world at that time, including us, the United States, sort of hovered on the brink of destruction for several days in October. And ironically enough, the Shchedryk song was also written in October back then. And it was a standoff between the USSR and the United States. And it was over sending a short and medium-range ballistic missile by the USSR to Cuba, right next door to it. They are our neighbors. The missiles were being put in place as a result of the failed Bay of Pigs invasion by U.S. forces into Cuba in an attempt to overthrow Castro's regime. The USSR considered it a possibility that a future invasion by the United States just might succeed. So the then leader of Moscow, Nikita Khrushchev, decided to put some strong deterrents in place. And in the end, the USSR backed down and removed the missiles, with a lot of back-channel negotiating coming into play. And the world breathed a little easier. And in New York City, there was a couple that was married, and they decided they had to write something about what was going on in the world. Because as they sat in their studio, they were listening to the radio to actually find out if the United States or the world was going to be obliterated. And one of the writers said, "En route to my home, I saw two mothers with their babies in strollers. The little angels were looking at each other and smiling, and all of a sudden," he says, "my mood was extraordinary. A glimpse of these little babies filled Noel Regency's heart with poetry. The little ones reminded him of the newborn lambs. Thus the song begins, said the night wind to the little lamb." How the threat of nuclear war inspired this classic Christmas song. He was a person of a musical career, and he had competed and learned all about the German army after the Nazis overran his country in World War II. But he didn't just grin and bear it, instead becoming double agent for the French resistance and passing on intelligence about the German strategy. So he was involved not only in music, but he was military also. And even with the explosive popularity of Do You Hear What I Hear, which was sung by Bing Crosby, several people, the mention of the child certainly places the song within the Christmas context, and there are clues in it. Though if you listen for them, that it has a contemporary framework, in particular the plea for people, for all people to pray for peace everywhere. And that was added to the text. When it, of course, then it became the whole point of the lyrics. And the line about the star with the tail as big as the kite, that was simply about not just the Bethlehem star, but the missiles that could have been obliterating the whole earth. So the tale becomes much more, because it evokes the biblical star that led the Magi to the Christ child, but it does evoke a nuclear missile also. And it's almost as if the song is asking, which one will it be? Notice how in this song, there's a slow build-up in the volume, and excitement mirrors the climb up for the inanimate wind to the king who has the power to proclaim peace. They said that they couldn't get through the song themselves without tearing up. And it was actually performed at Regny's funeral in 2002. So you see that the history of the songs that we sing over the season, they aren't all from a very long time ago, although most of them are old and traditional. This particular "Do You Hear What I Hear" is more recent. And if we go back to the Shchedryk, da-da-da-da-dum, when we go into the music of both songs, dum-da-da-dum, dum-da-da-dum. How about this year, when you hear that song, especially with the commercials that are still on air, that you give thought to the Ukrainian people and all that they are going through once again, and Russia's behind it. And do you hear what I hear? Russia was behind that song too. So pay attention to the lyrics of the songs as you sing them and hum them, and think of them as traditional, because they have history in them, and it's history that we need to know, or history repeats itself, doesn't it? So on this day, I wish all of you a very happy new year, and as we venture into 23, I hope it brings surprises that are good for each and every one of us. And the people said, Amen.